Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Heretic Hammer podcast. I am your host, Marshall, and this is my co-host, Dylan.
Hello, hello.
And you know what? Like, I just went through. We've been having a good time. You know, we've had some good episodes. You know, I feel like we've been building something here. You know, I've just been at Adepticon. You know, it was a great time. But screw Warhammer. We're quitting. It's over. Warhammer's done. Now it's all. That's right. Now it's all about Gundam.
We've been building up to this the whole time. I don't know how y'all were even tuning in the first place for Warhammer. It was never actually about Warhammer. No one cares about that. What everybody cares about is Gundam. It's cooler in every conceivable way. I mean, everything about it. The games are cooler. The stories are cooler. The lore is a lot better explained. The model kits make so much more sense.
Okay, so well, that might be the one
nonsense.
That actually isn't a meme.
Enough with the Warhammer nonsense. All right, we have both tolerated it for too long. It's time to change things up. It is time for Mobile Suit Gundam, Dylan's Counterattack.
Oh, God.
Today, on the first proper episode of this channel, I am going to be giving a succinct, professional, and entertaining overview of Mobile Suit Gundam.
Okay.
Now, you might be asking yourself, Dylan.
Yes.
Gundam is like big and stuff, and it's been around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, yes, that's 100% true. So where do you even begin when it comes to talking about Mobile Suit Gundam as a franchise?
I have a quick question going into that.
Please. Please do.
This is really going to settle in my realm of Gundam. Now, when you say we're going into Mobile Suit Gundam, are you talking specifically franchise or one of the series?
I am specifically for today, because it's just this one episode for now. You know, obviously in the next episode here, we'll continue on. But for today, our primary focus is going to be on Mobile Suit Gundam 0079. But we're going to mention some of the other stuff as well. I'm going to explain the process here. Because, see, the way I thought about it is, in order for us to give kind of this like brief overview of Gundam as a whole, we're going to have to break this up into some major like categories. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to classify mecha. We're going to define mecha and determine how best to sort of like separate certain types of mecha from others to help you better understand and appreciate Mobile Suit Gundam. All right. We got to go all the way back to the definition of the concept as a whole. And then we're going to talk about Gundam as an anime. I'll be discussing, like I said, primarily Mobile Suit Gundam 0079, but we will make some mentions of some of the other anime because there are quite a few of them. We're going to talk about Gundam as plastic model kits, the history there, as well as a few important things to know about the art of plastic model kit construction. And then finally, we're going to cap it off with Gundam as a video game franchise, because for a long-running series such as this, there have also been a lot of video games. So we'll be diving into that as well. So, because of this, a few things of note. First of all, I am very likely going to miss some important information here and there. I may mess up names, name pronunciations. I might miss a few key details here and there.
I've never done that.
It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen.
Yeah, right? I mean, I've never done that, so I don't know if I can forgive you.
I understand that, but hear me out. Gundam is filled with there's a level of finesse to Gundam that Warhammer has never had. Gundam, they've released like manga about it. They've released novels about it. You know, there's a lot of like reading material for Gundam, the type of thing you don't get with Warhammer.
Yeah.
And so there's this wide breadth of lore and story and characters and relationships, things that it can be very easy to kind of like miss a few details here and there.
Mm-hmm.
And because I don't want this episode to be 6 hours long, I'm unfortunately going to have to gloss over a lot of really important details, like vital details, things that are crucial to our love of Mobile Suit Gundam as a franchise and as a whole. So because of that, I'm going to have to, we're not going to have time to cover the following topics. These are all very important. I want you to keep them in mind, but we're not going to be able to cover them today, okay?
Okay.
We're not going to be able to talk about Minovsky particles.
Okay.
Ichiro Itano and the Itano Circus, can't do it, can't cover.
Okay.
How to pronounce that name that's on the screen there.
Frabo?
Close enough.
Sure.
The phrase Captain Quattro Bagina, he is a Char. We don't have time. We don't have time to get into what that means. The Bright Slap. Extremely important, particularly in Zeta Gundam.
Okay.
Having your soul weighed down by gravity.
That's the most 40K sounding thing yet.
Idina Menzel's vocal performance on Defying Gravity. Very important, but we just don't have the time. I had to make cuts. These were necessary cuts.
I get it.
Assigning gender to the name Camille.
Oh, I know that one.
And finally, one of the most important ones of all that unfortunately we just do not have time to cover in this episode, maybe in future episodes, the Kobe Byerland.
What? That can't be real. I refuse to believe that.
These are all things. It's so real. Gundam Unicorn is incredible. Everyone knows this. These are all things that I would love to get into, but we just can't get into them today. But I want to at least acknowledge them so that anyone who's watching who is a diehard Gundam fan, just know that I hear you. You know, I feel you in my heart. I understand your pain. Maybe in the future, we'll see what happens. All right, enough of that nonsense. We need to get into classifying mecha. We need to talk about mecha as a whole so we can appreciate what Mobile Suit Gundam did for the mecha genre.
Gotcha.
And the way we're going to do that is we're going to divide mecha into 2 classifications. This might be the loudest my audio has ever been. This is what happens when you let me host the show. We're going to look at Super Robo or Super Robot and Real Robot. I've got them written here as Super Robo and Real Robo because that's how the cool kids say it. These are your 2 classifications for mecha. It's used particularly in regards to anime, but it can also apply to manga. It can apply to video games. And it will be really helpful for us to understand Gundam. So before we can talk about Gundam, we need to go to the way back. We need to go all the way back to the OG, the original gangster, the GOAT, the greatest of all time.
The greatest. Okay.
We need to go all the way back to 1956.
Oh, man.
And talk about our boy, Tetsujin 28.
Oh, boy.
Tetsujin 28, one of the first mecha anime to exist. One of the first mecha series. The thing about Tetsujin 28, he's the blue guy, by the way, in case you're confused.
Okay, look, I caught that slip.
Yeah.
Oh, hold on.
Remains to be seen.
Sounds weird. Hold on. Oops. It's less a you thing and obviously more just like a recording thing. So I'm just making sure things aren't actually broken here for the later portions. It's obviously not going to matter for the edit because we'll have our own audio, but it was something with the audio on thing, and I just wanted to make sure nothing else was broken. Okay, we're good. So we have the blue guy.
The blue. Listen, in some circles, if you put some leather on him, yeah, I mean, he'd fit right in.
Oh God.
Tetsujin 28.
He's got the studs.
Yes, he does. The guy on the right, Tetsujin 28. He is a giant robot. He fights bad guys by punching them.
Mm-hmm.
He's very good at it. So the thing to understand about Tetsujin 28, besides the fact that he is very, very cool, is that he is piloted remotely by that little guy in the tweed jacket on the left, Shotaro Kaneda. So Kaneda is not inside of Tetsujin 28 at all. He doesn't pilot him from like inside the mech.
Yeah.
He is actually outside of it, piloting it remotely.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason that's a big deal is because of another mecha series. There we go. And that is Mazinger Z.
Oh.
Because Mazinger Z comes out, and that really creates the standard for what Super Robot is defined by.
This render of Mazinger Z looks like it came out of a Homestar Runner cartoon.
I took it from the cheat myself. He wasn't looking, and I snuck it from him.
That's a reference about as old as these anime.
Don't do that. Don't make me feel dead inside. So the thing with Mazinger Z, besides the fact that it's really, really good, is that the main pilot, Koji Kabuto, he pilots the robot from inside, like a vehicle. Mm-hmm. And this is like a novel idea at the time. It's like that you would have the person actually be inside the robot, piloting it, moving, performing its actions. So much so that other Japanese production companies would then start creating their own series that were directly inspired by that. They looked at it and went, oh, wow, so you can have, a person fighting inside the robot, fighting monsters and stuff like that. That's great. Let's all do that too. And that's like where a lot of that type of anime comes from. Mm-hmm. So to kind of further define Super Robot, it's not just having the pilot be inside the robot. It's about the pilot itself. Koji Kabuto and other pilots like him, they're essentially superheroes. They're heroes. They are, they're not people with like major military experience or anything like that. They're just, unflappable, super confident heroes that are experts at piloting these robots, get them to do exactly what they want them to do. And the robots themselves are very much more on the fantastical side of things. A lot of them will like straight up come from like outer space, or they'll be like alien technology. They don't necessarily, they didn't originate on Earth, but they'll arrive on Earth. And then the pilot joins them and they go on fun adventures. A lot of Super Robot stories are named after the titular robot. So like I brought up Tetsujin 28 and Mazinger Z, that's the name of those shows as well, because they name it after the big cool robot that they want everybody to fall in love with.
And sell the toys of, as is often the case.
Yes, at 100%. Being able to sell like toys, models, things like that was a big part of these as well. Case in point, the Monster of the Week format is a big part of these series. A lot of them, usually the way that each episode works, there's not like a big overarching theme. There's not like a big narrative story that's being told. It's a monster shows up, the hero pilot and the mecha team up, they beat up the monster. That's the end of the episode. Happy ending. They win.
Every Sentai and Power Rangers theme song.
We'll get to that.
Yeah,
because another aspect of Super Robot is that there would often be, you would have like smaller machines or smaller mecha that would combine to make a larger, more powerful robot. So my example of this is Voltron, Legendary Defender. But you can absolutely tie that to Sentai, because Sentai shows would pick up on that whole idea of having this like big robot that is formed from combining these other robots together. And that is really important because it sells toys.
Yes.
Would you believe, why sell one toy when you can sell 5 of them that combine into one?
Mm-hmm.
So that becomes like a big thing too within Super Robot. Other examples of Super Robot is going to be stuff like Shin Getter Robo. You've got UFO Robo Grandizer, Daimos, Cybuster. A more modern example would be something like the Big O. I imagine there are some people out there who would don't listen, man.
I know I'm hitting you with the expiration date again.
That'll keep happening too.
Yeah, I know.
The Big O, I think some people will probably be like, that's more of like a Real Robo thing because of its like setting. I feel like it really qualifies, and it is very much like a lot of its design and its characteristics are influenced more so by Super Robot than Real Robot. So I'm choosing to count it. I'm sure there are others out there who wouldn't, but just by the nature of what it is, it's kind of a hybrid between the two. So,
That's right.
It's whatever. But yeah, there's a lot of ideas like that. Essentially, the thing to take away is just that Super Robot, it's not really about an overarching story. A lot of the times the robots aren't really from Earth, even if they're being used on Earth. And the people piloting them are super confident in what they do. They're usually very handsome, suave pilots, super charismatic, and they always win. They always save the day. They beat the monster of the week every week. Things like your rocket punch, like a lot of the attacks are very fantastical as well. They're not thinking about, the mechanics of like how the robot works so much as, is it cool? Okay, sweet. We'll put the rocket punch on the arm,
Yeah, a thing that, I was gonna say, that, and obviously even the suave MC part, that is very Big O.
Yes.
And then
yes.
But then also, the just like rule of cooling it. As we have been alluding to all this time going into this episode, like that was a thing for that like 40K has gone through many a time, as if you tried to think of the physics of literally anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't check, but it doesn't matter because it's cool.
Yeah, and it's a shame that they didn't have the foresight to just recognize that, and instead we're like, we'll just write 30 books about it and give you too much information instead of letting you just like, there's a thing in film where it's important to like trust the viewer. You got to trust in their ability to be able to form connections themselves. And Warhammer, I don't know if it does that, I just don't know that they've really achieved that. We'll see if they can pull that off in the future.
Yeah, they don't often let things, open-ended and questioning.
Yeah.
It's pretty laid out.
Yeah.
Who's the emperor? I don't know. Read a book.
Yeah, exactly.
Why would you start a podcast if you don't read every single Warhammer book every week? That's just ridiculous. Okay, I'm sorry. I let something that I'm kind of salty about get through. Come on, continue.
Don't break kayfabe. Stay on target.
Sorry, I'm losing it.
All right. So yeah, that's Super Robot. That's the general idea of Super Robot. So then from there we get into Real Robot.
Okay.
So where does Real Robot start? What is the origins of that? Mobile Suit Gundam.
Oh.
Mobile Suit Gundam is literally the origin of this concept. Mobile Suit Gundam debuts in 1979. And to give you a kind of a time perspective, stuff like Mazinger Z, that was happening in the 70s. We talked about Tatsujin 28 all the way back in 56, but stuff like Mazinger Z, Getter Robo, a lot of that was happening in the 70s. So not too far from this point. But sorry, I gotta move some things down here. But yeah, Mobile Suit Gundam comes along, and that almost single-handedly coins the concept of Real Robot. It breaks the mold and changes a lot of the ideas of like what a robot show is supposed to be about. And so the result is that you end up with a whole bunch of other shows that come out, try to copy its success, try to duplicate it. You end up with I mentioned Cybuster earlier when we were talking about Super Robot. Stuff like Cybuster and Battler Dumbine. It's interesting because they're more fantasy themed, but then they get regarded as real robot shows because of how they kind of blend in both of those concepts. But when it comes to real robot, Mobile Suit Gundam starts it. It's the way it handles storytelling, the way it handles its characters, and the way it handles its robots. All of that comes together to basically change how mecha anime exists. And obviously, it is still one of the most popular and influential anime to this day. And a big part of it is because of that, how much it changed everything when it released. Mm-hmm. So, speaking of changing things, there are a lot of other works, a lot of mecha anime, a lot of mecha stories that have come out since then that really fall into this category of real robot. So what defines it and makes real robot is that the mechs themselves, I mentioned before, Super Robot, generally they're very fantastical. A lot of times they are like alien technology that comes from space. With real robot, the mechs are often manufactured either by the Earth's military or by corporations on Earth. It's much more Earth-centric. The robots are made here on Earth. They are designed by humans on Earth. That's where they come from. A lot more thought is put into the production of robots in general and how they function. So if you're putting a rocket punch in your series, you're also going to explain to the audience the ins and outs of how that works mechanically.
So I'm guessing that's what breaks something like Gurren Lagann from being Super Robo versus Real Robo, because Gurren Lagann doesn't explain shit.
Yes.
Outside of the power of friendship.
Yeah. So I'm going to get to that in just a little bit here, but there are certain like modern contemporaries that show up that are very much pulling from both sides of the table, where they're really like they're grabbing elements from one side and from the other side and they're bringing them together. Everybody likes to throw around the term deconstruction when talking about certain like modern anime shows. My crazy, wild, hot take that probably isn't a hot take anymore because it's 2025 is that these shows aren't necessarily fully deconstructions. Like their goal is not to like completely rip apart these concepts. It's more so bringing them together in a unique way. But yeah, going back to real robots as a concept, there's a lot more thought put into how they function, and that also means that the weapons that they use tend to be more quote-unquote realistic. A lot of them use military weapons that are a lot more familiar to our world. It's a lot more of using like rifles, various guns, things that have ammunition. And the robots themselves aren't these like magic space robots that run forever. You know, they're just like powered by the power of friendship, like you said. They usually tend to run on actual like resources, and in a lot of cases that is like a part of the world building or the story itself is like how the robots themselves are powered. The stories themselves tend to have these large overarching events and themes. A really good way to think about it is Star Wars versus Star Trek, and this is not a discussion of like what's better than the other. It's a matter of how Star Wars in a lot of ways is a fantasy series, and a lot of its tropes, a lot of its story and thematic elements are borrowing from fantasy despite taking place in a science fiction environment. And with Star Trek, it is much more of like a hard sci-fi where they're in space and they're in ships, but they're also directly addressing these very complex narratives that use science fiction as a backing. And that is something that Real Robot does as well. It is often, the stories themselves are much more complicated. They tend to address a lot more real world issues as opposed to just being about like beating up an enemy and calling it a day. And that is another big thing about Mobile Suit Gundam, is that it has this extremely large overarching plot that touches on a lot of real world themes. And we'll be getting into that a little bit further. A couple major examples of Real Robot works in addition to Mobile Suit Gundam itself. You have something like Macross or Super Dimension Fortress Macross. This is kind of an interesting one in terms of like how people have been exposed to it, because Macross is the original series, but for a lot of people, particularly people in the US, they may be more familiar with the series Robotech.
Yeah, I mean, that's one I know of, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not a crime for that to be your introduction, because it was for me too. And the way that started is essentially a company called Harmony Gold takes the first 3 Macross films and sort of Frankensteins them together and like mashes them together to create a new series, and they call it Robotech. And then after that, they continue to use the Robotech name and create additional series and stories and episodes, but not necessarily like pulling exactly from Macross anymore. It's a similar thing to what Haim Saban does with Sentai, where they take a bunch of Sentai shows and then they re-release it in the US as a series called Power Rangers. You know, they intersperse these like live action elements of like these kids at a high school, this whole story about them being the Power Rangers and Zordon and everything like that. They basically take another series and they sort of reformat it and turn it into something else. The reason that you'll kind of see a lot of like ire nowadays when it comes to Robotech is because Harmony Gold as a company really sucks.
No.
And
well,
they
much like Saban.
It is a very similar story to Saban, where it's like Harmony Gold really, they have the rights to everything Robotech and all that, but they also have a lot of the interceding rights to Macross. And they have been really, really, really shady about their practices towards like making the original Macross available for viewing and for distribution. They've a lot of like important Macross stuff they've like kept barred and like prevented from having a wide release. So even if you wanted to like buy it, you know, like give them money for it, they've been like, nah, too bad, we're not interested. Which is really annoying and really frustrating, because in a way it's partially erasing the history of Macross in favor of Robotech. And that upsets a lot of people, because Macross was the original series that it's based off of. But in addition to that, you know, there's other series as well. Full Metal Panic is a really popular anime series. It was, you know, I remember it growing up being a really, really popular series. This is a Real Robot series, and something to consider is that like the robots that they're using in this case, the mechs, they're not like enormous mech. Real Robot isn't afraid to like change up the size of mecha overall. Super Robot, usually the robots are giant. They're like enormous, super tall robots. And with Real Robot, it's like some of them are like that. Gundam certainly has that element. But other series are not afraid to kind of switch things up in that regard. You also have something like Pat Labor, where as opposed to the robots being only used by a single person or only being used for like the military, this is them being used in more of like a mobile police force in a more local sense. They're existing and working within the cities themselves. When
Full
you
Metal
look
Panic
at,
definitely being the one of those anime that I discovered because I searched Full Metal Alchemist, but when you just typed Full Metal, 2 things came up.
Yeah.
At the time, especially.
So you just kind of click the other one. You're
because
like,
they were
hey,
like
what's this thing?
releasing at the time. They were releasing at the same time.
Yeah.
So it was like it
Definitely.
was one of those things where you could find it very easily.
Pat Labor focuses more, again, it's a little more ground level. It's not as much about like these major conflicts. It's a little smaller in scale. You can look at this image and then see the correlation between this and God, what's their name? It's on the tip of my tongue. Sometimes I just can't. Oh yeah, the Tau in Warhammer 40K.
I wondering. You have to wonder where the.
If you thought to yourself, why did Dylan pick the Tau? Was it just because of Gundam? Is it just because he thinks Gundam is cool? No, the answer is Pat Labor, because Pat Labor is one of my favorite things ever, and it immediately reminded me of that seeing the Tau. So I was like, yep, that's what I'm all about. Now, preceding Pat Labor, we can't forget the immensely popular, very influential Combat Mecha Exabungle.
What a name.
And I bring that up because it is incredibly popular and everyone talks about it. Anyone who knows about mecha, they're going to talk to you about Exabungle. And that's why I was able to get this high quality image
is that?
of the Exabungle. That's why it's so high quality, because I was able to very easily find high quality renderings of these. Clearly. And also the fact that it's a toy and not an image from the series itself.
Not even from the show.
And the reason for that is because Combat Mecha Exabungle is very popular and everyone knows about it. That's all we got to think about. Okay, so moving on. I also want to bring up this is just kind of my own personal thing. Keeping in line with the idea of like Real Robot doesn't have to be about giant robots. They can be smaller in scale. And one of my favorite examples of that, one of my favorite anime of all time, is a series called Ride Back, which is about a ballet student who has a very serious injury and likely won't be able to dance ballet ever again. And she joins up with the Ride Back Club, which is this club that has these mechs that are kind of humanoid in stature, but they can also transform into motorcycles. They're very mobile. And she kind of refines her mobility and her sense of freedom through operating the Ride Back. It's a very good series. You should definitely check it out if you haven't.
Good. Another anime series to pine my desires for a motorcycle.
Yeah. It is incredibly sick and a great example of Real Robot because it also dives into a lot of the military and a lot of important overarching themes. But yeah, Real Robot, fairly different from Super Robot in terms of how the robots function, where they come from, the stories that are being told. The pilots themselves, they're real people, These are stories about like actual people, whether they be soldiers, pilots, mechanics. A lot of times they're not like these amazing, practically pseudo superhero like Sentai like figures. These are actual people with actual struggles that they're going through. So now that we have defined mecha,
yes, I'm glad we got this base lesson before we even talked about what is Gundam.
Let's get back into, or no, I'm so sorry. You brought it up before. So we'll real quick, we'll dive into this. You brought up Gurren Lagann.
Yeah.
So as I was mentioning before, so with Super Robot and Real Robot, you get a lot of like, so Mazinger Z, widely credited with sort of popularizing Super Robot as a genre. You get a bunch of series that are created afterwards. Same thing with Real Robot. Mobile Suit Gundam comes along. A bunch of series get inspired by it and get created after the fact. Two anime series that get talked about a ton are Gurren Lagann, which is created by Gainax, and Neon Genesis Evangelion.
Was it triggered by that point, or was it Gainax?
It was still Gainax.
Okay.
Gurren Lagann was still Gainax. It was Trigger with Kill la Kill moving forward.
Oh, okay.
But yes, Gurren Lagann and Neon Genesis Evangelion, These are two incredibly popular, also very influential series in their own right. And they are both, again, people tend to look at them as deconstructions of the genre. They see them as like something that sort of takes the tropes or the traditional ideas and themes of these concepts and is like breaking them down or is like providing like a counter to them. Um, and I don't necessarily feel the same way. I feel like the creators of those respective series were much more focused on creating something that pulled from their own experiences and their own themes that they wanted to pursue, but was also still very much paying a lot of tribute to the series that came before. Gurren Lagann is obviously very, very reminiscent of a lot of these super robot series from the past, but has this large overarching story. There are these deeper themes centered around the main characters, and the main characters grow and change over time, and they don't always succeed. And the same thing can, of course, be said for Evangelion. It really blurs the lines of, how much of these robots are pure robot, how much of them are organic, you know. And then the characters themselves are obviously going through these incredibly difficult, scary moments. To be a mecha pilot is not like this very fun, exciting thing. It's terrifying. It's real. It is difficult. There is a lot of pressure, a lot that can go wrong. But there's still frequently pulling from those elements of previous shows, like Evangelion, for all of its darkness and all the themes that it covers. They're still putting things like the red hot kick in there, these like coordinated, super flashy attacks that the Eva perform on the angels that are just very reminiscent of the super robot shows from back in the day. They're not forgetting any of these concepts. They're just bringing something a little different to the table with them. Yeah. So
timelines.
Let's talk about Gundam.
Yeah. So Gundam.
Gundam spans, as we established, the first Gundam series was released in 1979. So at this point, Gundam is like nearing 50 years old for us. And over that time, there has been a ton of series, a ton of shows, a ton of manga, all kinds of things. So how do you keep it straight? How do you keep track of what is what's canon, what's in what's timeline, so on and so forth?
Well, if I know anything about the Gundam community and their love for the characters, you don't do that.
Well, you don't have to, certainly.
Yeah.
But here's how we're going to do it.
There's
for
definitely
today,
plenty of not keeping it straight. I mean,
about as straight as Tetsugen 28, really. So here's the thing. For today, we're going to mainly focus on that first series, Mobile Suit Gundam 0079, which takes place and is the start. The start, not the start time-wise, but the start that is the first series to occur in the Universal Century Timeline, or UC.
Okay.
This is like the primary timeline of Gundam. It's the one that has the most anime and stories occur within it. It is pretty easily the most well-known. Mobile Suit Gundam, obviously, that happens in the Universal Century Timeline, but also series like 8th MS Team, War in the Pocket. Zeta and Double Zeta are sequels to Mobile Suit Gundam, and characters from Mobile Suit Gundam actually like reappear in those series. You have Char's Counterattack, which is an extremely good movie that is also serves as like a sequel. It occurs after the events of Mobile Suit Gundam. And then you have Unicorn, which is a little more further separated in time, but still takes place during that timeline. Someone will ask, I'm sure, during the process of me writing this episode, a new Gundam series was announced. And it is called Gundam Quex or Quacks. There's been like a few different like canon pronunciations that have been thrown out there.
Yep.
All you need to know for now is that Gundam Quex is an alternate version of the Universal Century timeline.
Mm.
It is kind of a what if scenario where instead
Yeah,
of
wasn't
one
it
thing
as if-
happening,
yeah.
what if something else happened instead? What if the events occurred a little bit differently? So I don't have it listed here because it's not part of like that initial Universal Century timeline, but it is an alternate version of that. In addition, you have something like the After Colony timeline, which is where Gundam Wing takes place. You, as I understand it, you are at least partially familiar with Gundam Wing.
That's the Gundam that I saw growing up.
Yes. Yeah, and the interesting thing about that, we're gonna talk about a little bit further in a moment, but Gundam Wing, because of how like the airing of the original Gundam series worked out, for a lot of people in the U.S., some of the first Gundam that they saw was Gundam Wing, as opposed to the original Mobile Suit Gundam. You also have the Cosmic Era, which is, of course, Gundam Seed and Seed Destiny.
Oh, boy.
Extremely popular. Unfortunately, I don't have time today to get into why they are so popular and beloved across the Gundam fan base. But
I can't.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure if there is in fact sarcasm in that or not, based on a conversation we had previously. I really don't know. I really don't know if there was sarcasm.
It's okay. Like I say, this is something that we can cover for another time. Just know that it is a series that people frequently cite as some of the best that Gundam has to offer. And the characters are inscrutable.
Again, I don't know.
And those could be two conflicting statements, but we'll just move past that. We're not going to think about it.
It was a series of all time.
It was a series, I think is a very good way to describe it.
Yeah.
We also have the Anno Domini timeline. That's where your Gundam 00 comes into play. In some of the more recent series, you have post-disaster timeline. This is Iron-Blooded Orphans. The timeline that takes place in, very separated from anything to do with Universal Century. And then the most recent, I guess you'd call it completed, if only because the series itself is finished. But your Ad Stella timeline is where Gundam Witch from Mercury comes from, which is a very recent Gundam series, highly acclaimed, non-sarcastic.
Iron-Blooded Orphans is also rated very well. That's from what I've been told.
Iron-Blooded Orphans, I would say, is mixed. There are some people who are really into it, and then there are some people that are really, really not into it. It is very much a mixed reception across Gundam fans. But the main Gundam Barbados is objectively cool. Everyone agrees that Gundam Barbados is cool as hell. But yeah, those are the timelines. Like I say, for today, we're going to mainly focus on Mobile Suit Gundam. I'm realizing to my horror that the next slide was supposed to be deleted and it's still in there, so we're going to fly past it.
Okay.
Whoop, whoop.
Okay.
Whoop, whoop.
Well,
There we go.
okay.
Perfect, seamless transition. As you can
It's
expect.
okay.
From,
No one in the audience will have seen it. It's fine.
This is what you can expect from the Heretic Hammer podcast. Okay. So, Mobile Suit Gundam 0079. We're finally here. We're talking about it. This is the first Gundam. So it's usually called 0079, which is the time in the Universal Century timeline that it takes place, or Gundam 79 because it was released in 1979. Very easy to remember. This was a series produced by Nippon Sunrise. It was created and directed by Yoshiyuki Tomino.
Is that related to the Sunrise that exists now, or is it completely different? Oh,
yes,
cool,
100%. Yoshiyuki Tomino is, in a lot of ways, I think you could consider him to be one of the godfathers of modern mecha. His creation of Mobile Suit Gundam and his contributions to it over the years are so insanely influential. You could do an entire separate episode, again, just on the influences and how it changed how we perceive anime. The original title for the series was going to be Gunboy. It's 100% serious. It was going to be called Gunboy, and then they decided during production, you know what, we'll actually change the name and we'll call it Mobile Suit Gundam instead.
You know what? I think someone made the right decision.
I think they made the right call.
Yeah.
I really do. But yeah, this is a series that has been adapted into just like numerous sequels and spin-offs. The first series itself only spanned 43 episodes. It went from April 7th, 1979 to January 26th, 1980. Not even a full year. And only 43 episodes to it. The show itself,
in today's standards, would be insane, but this, that partly is remembering the TV standards back then were very different in terms of like counter numbers of episodes expected from a series.
Yeah, and when Mobile Suit Gundam released, it was not super critically acclaimed. It wasn't getting a ton of viewership. Not a lot of people were watching it, and so Sunrise was like, all right, we're probably going to have to just wrap this thing up. But we'll get into, in a little later, we'll get into why there was a sudden uptick in interest in Gundam after the fact. But yeah. Tomino creates this series. In creating the series, he had very specific themes in mind. For Tomino, he wanted to tell a story about the horrors of war, about the experience of being in war, about forced immigration, and a lot of the things that he was familiar with and that Japan had experienced during World War II. So for the rest of this episode and this presentation, I just want you to keep in mind that the primary themes of Gundam are that war is bad. It's very easy to forget when you're looking at all the cool robots, but I want you to remember, war is bad. That is what Gundam is about.
I need this image.
That is what the point of this is. We're looking at right now is an extremely popular meme that has been like reused for like various different shows and stories and stuff.
Yeah.
But it also started with Gundam. This meme's origin is also Gundam. Because unfortunately people have a tendency to watch shows like Gundam and go, oh man, I like when the cool robots fight. And they forget about the fact that war is bad. So just keep that in mind.
Yes.
Just keep that under consideration
I will.
as we continue through this story. This is, speaking of robots, this is the first appearance of the RX-78-2 Gundam. That is the almost titular Gundam that everyone is familiar with, the design that everyone knows and loves. It starts with this series. For a long time, if you were to visit Diver City, Tokyo, which is this like huge shopping district, this like huge structure, they had a life-sized Mobile Suit Gundam out in front of the building that was the original RX-78 model. And several years back, they ended up replacing it. So it is now a model from Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn that lights up at night and moves and is very, very cool. But I do miss the original RX-78 being there.
Maybe one day it'll be back.
Maybe one day they'll bring it back in some sense. There was the even larger Gundam that they created. It was an RX-78 style Gundam that it was essentially like mounted into the type of like mobile like launch platform that you would see in the series. And this Gundam could literally like move its appendages.
Yeah, I mean that was a huge,
which is
attraction.
Crazy.
Yeah,
absolutely crazy.
That became like a mecca for Gundam fans too.
Yeah, and also just speaks to the popularity of Mobile Suit Gundam that it would achieve later on, where that would essentially become like a monument, essentially that has been built to celebrate the series. So this first series here, Mobile Suit Gundam, takes place in the year 0079 in the Universal Century. and it largely focuses on the war between the Principality of Xeon and the Earth Federation. The RX-78-2 that we just talked about belongs to the Earth Federation. It is actually a prototype that originally is not ready to go out into battle until it is found by teenage civilian mechanic Amara Ray. But before we get to that, we got to talk a little bit more about the Earth Federation. So, the Earth in this series is a little messed up. They're not having a good time. They're dealing with overpopulation. They are dealing with the severe consumption of resources. There have been major ecological disasters. The planet itself is technically still hospitable, but it has been over years and years and years of overuse, overconsumption, cough, cough, global warming, cough, cough. It has been determined that Earth is no longer it's not as strong as it once was. And the Earth Federation decides that we can't have everyone continuing to live here and continuing to populate the planet. It needs to be able to heal. So in order for it to heal, the Earth Federation announces the Space Colonization Plan. They begin the construction of these orbital habitats based on the designs of a scientist by the name Gerard K. O'Neill. And they are essentially these space colonies with several sides to them. They're like these large cylinders, but they have multiple sides. Each side is kind of like a full administrative sector. And the colonies are launched into space. And what the Earth Federation does is that they relocate most of the human population to those colonies in space as part of their colonization plan. Except for a lot of wealthy and influential people who are able to buy their way to remain on Earth. So the perception comes about that the Earth Federation has this sort of Earth-born elite status to it, that they're prioritizing allowing the wealthy, the rich, to live comfortable lives on Earth, while the ordinary populace, the lower class, is forced to into a mass immigration and forced to leave their homes to be shipped off into space to these colonies, and forced to live in space, not allowed to return back to Earth. And then I just want to make sure I got the right. Yes. So Earth Federation essentially turns Earth into a police state. It's not, they're not coming out here like we're a democracy. Like, no. It is very much a police state. The Federation controls everything. They decide how things happen on Earth. They are in control of the space colonies. They decide how the space colonies are run. And it is this mass deportation, this mass immigration of human civilians to the colonies, whether they want to be there or not, and they're forced to live there, a lot of them against their will.
So if any would stop and think for a moment, thinking into the mindset and remembering, that, our Gundam technically is representing Earth Federation. That's our protagonist.
Yes. So this is one of the fun things about Gundam.
Yes.
Is that the thing you kind of ask yourself is, who are the baddies? Who are the bad guys here?
Are we the baddies?
It can't be the Earth Federation, right? That's the good guys. That's, that's who the main characters we're following. They're part of the Earth Federation. They can't be the bad guys. The fun thing about Gundam that makes it very, very cool and interesting is that, depending on how you look at it, everybody's the bad guys. Everybody does things in the name of their pursuit, in the name of their goals, that are kind of not great. So with the Earth Federation, it is the militarization police state essentially taking control of the Earth and forcing the mass deportation of people into space. Not great. Not fun. On the other side of things, as the Earth Federation is dealing with the general increased unrest of the people that are now living in these space colonies, negotiations that they are trying to have break down with this rising group within one of the colonies. And this group, they're calling themselves the Principality of Xeon. And Xeon starts with the Republic itself, starts with its leader, Xeon Zumdekun, who back prior to the start of this series in Universal Century 0068, he's on his deathbed. He is essentially the leader of this like rising republic, the Xeon Republic, and on his deathbed, he mentions a single name. He says the name Degwin Zabi. The people of Side 3, where the Republic of Xeon is, they hear that name, and they take that to mean that Daekun is naming Degwin to be the new leader of the Republic. They figure that because he mentioned that was his like dying words, was his name, it's like, oh, he's naming Degwin Zabi, and by extension, the Zabi family, as the new rulers of the Republic. So that happens. Degwin Zabi gets appointed as the leader of the Republic of Xeon. He immediately adopts the title of Soto. Do you want to guess what Soto means?
It has nothing to do with like something like emperor, like would it?
That's right. It means Lord.
Oh boy.
He immediately takes on the title Degwin Soto Zabi, so Lord Zabi. Seizes control of the government of that republic.
When all things that had once good intentions.
And his whole deal is that the only way for the colonies to be fully independent of the Earth and of the Earth Federation is for the entire principality to fight. They can't just be like making peaceful negotiations. They need to fight. And they rapidly develop their own military. By this point, Side 3 is sort of independent of Earth, but yeah, they're building up this military. The Republic of Xeon is building itself up, becoming the principality. And eventually, over time, the Zabi family is pretty much in control of the Principality of Xeon and officially declares their independence from the Earth Federation and declares war on the Federation as well. So this launches a war of independence that is called the 1 Year War. Basically, every continent on Earth gets affected by this. The Earth Federation, which, by the way, this is their flag. This is the Earth Federation's flag.
Come to Brazil.
Come to Brazil. Enjoy our Triforces. And this is the flag of the Principality of Xeon.
Oh, God.
So now that you've seen both of these flags, can you tell who's the good guy and who's the bad guy?
You know, I mean, right. Obviously, though, that's the thing, right? We're getting into this like wishy territory, right? Because like, obviously you look into the background of Xeon and it's like, oh, this was the Republic of Xeon, and they're kind of getting the shaft from, the kind of elitist police state of the Earth Federation. So like, we don't want, like, we're tired of getting that. We're going to work on it. We're going to negotiate. But then obviously somebody in a power vacuum seizes that control and essentially decides this is mine now, and essentially takes a fairly selfish approach to things. At that point, we've entered into real world government scenarios.
At this point, oh yeah, and once again, I just want to remind the class, be sure to keep this image in mind as we continue to speak. At this point, I think it is very fair to look at this conflict and say the Principality of Xeon is in the right. Like, especially if you're not familiar with the Zabi family as a whole.
I mean,
the idea of like this is a sizable portion of one of the space colonies that is like, we are tired of living under the effective rule of the Earth Federation. We are declaring our independence. We are going to declare war against you. We will fight for our freedom. And you hear that and you go, yeah, that makes sense. That's yeah, sure.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's like, it's on its face. It's that thing of like, hey, like it makes, look, we, at some point you think that the Federation is no longer willing to listen to you peacefully, and as a number of videos have pointed out to me recently, the United States was not founded through peaceful negotiation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there is always that realm where people can be driven to such things.
Mm-hmm. So it's easy at this point to kind of feel a little bit for Xeon and be like, yep, that, I kind of get it. I appreciate it. You're trying to stick it to the man. You're trying to find your own independence. It makes sense. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the tools Xeon used to try to achieve this.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, now we're into war. And
now we're into war.
Remember the image.
War is bad. So Xeon's deal, they are obviously nowhere near as large as the Earth Federation, mm-hmm. but they have a very important tool up their sleeve. They have a new type of humanoid weapon called a mobile suit. That allows them,
the first one.
That allows them to get this sort of tactical upper hand on the Earth Federation. And they are using these mobile suits in raids, in attacks. Obviously the Earth Federation is like, well, we need to have a counter to this. We need to have something of our own that can fight against their usage of these mobile suits, which are giant mecha that the pilot sits inside of. They have arms and legs. They have full control. They usually have beam weapons or fire guns. And it's a big part of Xeon's ability to fight against the Federation. When that's not enough, at some point, Xeon decides, you know what? When you really think about it, these colonies, when you really think about it, are like really, really big weapons.
Oh, no.
And if you destroy the right parts of the colony and sever its connection, you could probably, like, I don't know, release it and let it fall directly to Earth.
Oh, no.
And these colonies, which are miles and miles in size, when you really think about it, it's kind of like being able to just drop a nuclear bomb at any time.
Yeah.
So they do that.
Effective, I imagine.
And one of the first major instances of that during this war is that they drop one of the colonies. They damage it and drop it with people still inhabiting it.
Oh, yeah, I mean.
And it's not able to... There's a lot more to the story, and they're not able to fully hit the target, which was initially the headquarters of the Earth Federation.
Well, yeah, I mean, you go for the head, right?
But what does happen is that it does still crash into the Earth, and the impact is reminiscent of that of like a meteor hitting the planet.
Like the dinosaur one?
Almost. Not quite as catastrophic, but when the colony hits Australia...
Oh, not Australia, no.
It wipes a major portion of Australia off the map.
Oh, I imagine.
Sydney no longer exists.
No, not Sydney, not the Opera House.
Where Sydney, Australia was, there is essentially a hole, just a big hole in the earth. Several cities entirely wiped out. Just major damage done to the land, major changes in climate and weather that occur as a result of that impact.
Now is
And this is
Xeon?
something that is
Sorry.
done multiple times.
Oh God.
They don't
I was
just
gonna
stop
say
at
is
one.
yeah.
Yeah, there are multiple instances of colony drops to the point where it is also kind of a memetic thing in the community of like, do we need to turn the tide of battle? We'll just drop this colony inhabited by thousands and thousands of innocent people and just let it fall to the earth.
Yeah. So where is Xeon like one of it also orbiting the Earth still, or
Yeah,
is it like on a planet?
Xeon as a republic was inhabiting uh these colonies.
Okay.
They were like partially inhabiting some of the colonies. Side 3, if I'm remembering my information correctly, was like it's where like Xeon got its start, was side 3 of one of the major colonies. But they expanded, they took control of other colonies as they grew in power. And of course, with the proclaiming of the war, a big thing for them was like trying to claim and capture as many of the colonies as possible to use them against the Earth Federation.
Right.
So yeah, that is something that Xeon is doing in their war efforts against the Earth Federation, is that they are all about the independence and freedom, but they are more than happy to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of lives to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing we want to talk about in relation to these colonies is the fact that taking a huge portion of the population of Earth and forcing them into space changes how people are perceived, not only mentally and societally, but also
Right.
how they change physically.
Mm.
So when we're talking about people that live on Earth and people live on space, people that are residents of the space colonies are usually referred to as space noids. And then people who usually were born of Earth are considered Earthnoids. Something interesting that happens is that a new stage of human evolution begins to occur.
Oh.
It is believed to be that in order to adapt to living in space, the human body evolves this like heightened mental awareness. So you see among space noids a lot of these quote unquote new types, these like newly evolved, enhanced humans, that have like this greater intelligence, this greater perception. But what's interesting, and I'll say that 100 times because it's Gundam, is that it's not just people that are born in space, it's also people that were born on Earth who were then raised in space on the colonies. It just seems to be a case of like being in space, living in space after a certain amount of time causes these like new type abilities to appear. So that, of course, further is like causing these separations where you have these new types who consider themselves to be genetically and morally superior to normal humans. And it's creating this like further divide between people.
Ah, yes.
So that all of that kind of brings us into where Mobile Suit Gundam 0079 takes place. Because when 0079 happens, Xeon has declared their independence. It is the 1-year war has begun. For this story of 0079, it begins with a warship of the Federation that is called the White Base. It is the sort of base of operations, if you will, for a lot of the major characters that we follow. They are visiting a secret base on the Side 7 colony because they need to pick up a new weapon created by the Federation. However, some Xeon forces, like a reconnaissance team, attacks the White Base and like impedes their progress. one member of like the reconnaissance team disobeys mission orders entirely, and they attack the colony directly. So they kill a bunch of the Federation crew and civilians that are on the colony in the process. One of the members of that colony is a man by the name of Amuro Ray, a young man. He is a gifted mechanic, and when the attack happens, he happens to come across this new prototype that the Federation was building that the white base was supposed to be picking up. And that is the RX-78 Gundam. Amuro manages to pilot the Gundam, despite having no experience piloting a mobile suit before this, and beat back some of the Zeon forces. And he joins in with the white base and the people that are piloting the white base, the chain of command there. And together they then work to kind of set out with their newly formed crew, which is like a mixture of civilian recruits, it's refugees, people that were piloting the white base, to essentially fight back against the Zeon forces.
Quickly before you continue,
yes.
Have you shifted the slides yet at all, or
nope? We're still on the same slide.
Just wanted to make sure it wasn't stuck or anything.
Yeah, we're about to shift the slide in a moment here.
Okay.
So Amuro Ray is, for all intents and purposes, the main character of Mobile Suit Gundam 0079. He is the main person that we follow. But there is another character who serves as a very important, like, antagonistic force to Amuro. And that is the lieutenant commander of Zeon, and he is in charge of a lot of the Zeon forces that are attacking them. And that is one Char Aznable.
There he is.
So Amuro Ray is on the left. We've got Char Aznable on the right. These two are the primary protagonist and antagonist for this series. And their rivalry, their fight against each other, is a huge part of what makes Mobile Suit Gundam so great. Amuro, as I mentioned, he is the main character. He is a new type. Amuro was born on Earth, is relocated to the colonies, but he develops the new type abilities. And as I mentioned, finds the Mobile Suit Gundam, the RX-78-2, and pilots it, becomes the pilot for it. Amuro's big thing is that he is a very, very good mechanic. He has a real knack for it. If you are familiar with the robotic talking ball known as Haro, if you've seen it anywhere, Haro is built by Amuro Ray. He built Haro initially.
Yeah.
Amuro is incredibly smart. Like I said, established mechanic. When he pilots the RX-78 for the first time, he literally just looks at the piloting manual and immediately understands what he needs to do and manages to destroy 2 Zakus, which is the name of the mobile suits that the Zeon forces control, like immediately. But he's not familiar enough with the Gundam to be able to pilot it and fight off somebody like Char Aznable, who is also an extremely adept pilot, incredibly skilled. So it's something where Amuro, over the course of the series, has to kind of hone his skills, become more familiar with piloting the Gundam, become more adept at combat, and eventually he reaches the point where he earns the title of White Devil.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Crazy nickname, right? Something to consider is that Amuro is 15 years old.
Common anime trope, yes.
Yep. Obviously very popular now with a lot of anime, particularly shonen anime. But yeah, your main character, they're a 15-year-old. They're a teenager.
I feel like there's a growing. What's interesting is, like, I feel like from American audiences, there was a growing this is a different topic, but it's just a note I wanted to make. Like that's, I feel like it's a growing thing where like people are starting to become very tired, especially as many, I think, millennial and Gen Z anime fans get older and older, that the distaste and the tiredness of every anime having, these very, as we know, anime troped teenagers.
Yes. Yeah.
So
certainly.
it is, luckily, I mean, and it was different obviously then. And like obviously that was a thing that continued for a very long time. But it's something I'm wondering if we'll continue to see more and more of a shift of, now that I think, depending on the influence of various audiences.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. And another thing with Amuro, because he's so young, and like obviously he doesn't start out, he's not in the military, you know what I mean? Like he didn't go into active service. He is by all means a civilian. He's a mechanic, he's a very skilled mechanic, but he wasn't in active military duty. He ends up wrapped up in the middle of this conflict, not by choice. And so he is a very reluctant protagonist in a lot of ways. And is this is one of the series that really sort of like establishes that idea of like your anime mecha pilot protagonist doesn't really want to fight initially. Like they're very reluctant about this idea of like getting involved in this conflict. And it's not just like all fun and games. It's a very serious thing that you're entering into. He is also, I don't think he is the originator, but when we think about the term otaku these days, that is definitely like you would describe Amuro as something of an otaku, where he's like very fixated on his hobby, not like an incredibly social person, very, very focused on that.
Yeah, the real meaning of otaku, not what we call it now, where it's
exactly
just anime fan.
Exactly, the origination of the name.
He's not the original, but he's a representation of what the word actually means, not our bastardization of it.
Yes. But yeah, Amuro, he is the protagonist of the series. Let's talk about Char Aznable.
Yeah.
Char Aznable, and that is how it's pronounced. Growing up, I pronounced it Char, but it's actually Char.
Probably would have, unless I heard it if they said, the only time I think I would have continued to say Char is if that was just how it was said in the dub.
Sure.
But I don't even know what that would have been. So
Char Aznable, I introduced him earlier as the primary antagonist. You could argue he is also one of the main characters of the Universal Century. He has that energy about him where it's like he's not the main guy, but he's kind of the main guy. All right.
I mean, look
he doesn't just show up in the original Mobile Suit Gundam. He shows up in multiple series. Slight spoilers in that regard, but he is a very popular character and he shows up multiple times. He is known by a number of names, and we established before that Amuro Ray eventually gets the title of White Devil. Char Aznable, after a specific event, after a battle, is referred to as the Red Comet. Yes. The thing about Char is that where Amuro is this very reluctant, otaku-like character, he's not super confident at first. He's only just learning how to pilot the Gundam. Char is super confident, super charismatic, highly respected. He is a lieutenant commander. His subordinates are, fully respect him. He is willing to kill anyone he needs to in order to achieve the goals that he has. But the thing about Char is that he has a soft side. He has trauma, as all great characters do.
Yes, exactly.
He's very complex in that regard because Char, his family, is not what you would expect it to be. And maybe Shar Aznable isn't even his real name. Maybe he was born with a different name. But yeah, Shar is known as being this extremely respected lieutenant commander. He pilots an assortment of mobile suits throughout the initial series. The one that you are probably most familiar with or like heard about is one called the Sazabi. Sazabi. It is a huge red Gundam-like mobile suit that has sort of become associated with him, especially once he is referred to as the Red Comet. But he is very much the primary antagonist of this series. He and Amuro frequently fight with each other. They duel, they battle, they learn more about each other over time. It's great. It rules. And the image that we're looking at on screen here of I came here to laugh at you, that is not a meme edit. That is the literal exact image.
I mean, I was gonna say that I mean, these types of shows are littered with that type of thing.
Oh yeah. This particular instance, this comes from Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam. It is a scene where Char and Amuro meet each other again after like not having seen each other for a long time. And Amuro basically asks like, you know, why are you here? And Char's answer is, I came here to laugh at you. And it is one of the best moments. I can't possibly do it justice because you need to have the buildup of the series beforehand, but it is like one of the most quoted, noted moments of the entire series, and just like establishes Char as like, frankly, an asshole. But he is very much that type of like, you know, willing to do terrible things to get what he wants, but you love to hate him. He's super lovable, super enjoyable to watch as a character. Okay. So that's where we're going to leave off with Mobile Suit Gundam, the anime series. And we're going to hop into the history of Gunpla.
Ooh.
So, Mobile Suit Gundam premieres in 1979. Yes. It doesn't do all that well. The series isn't super well received at first. It eventually gets canceled after 43 episodes. And the toys that they originally create to go with the series, those aren't selling very well either. No one's really buying them. No one's really interested in them. The word Gunpla, as I'm sure some can guess, is a Japanese amalgamation of English words. It means Gundam and plastic, as in like a plastic model.
Yeah.
So Gundam plastic model, Gunpla.
Yeah.
What happens is that like less than a year after Mobile Suit Gundam starts airing, Bandai gets the rights to make toys for Gundam. And so what they do is that they decide, instead of just making, you know, regular toys, like regular figures, we're going to make model kits of these Gundam robots.
Really appease the youths.
Yeah. And like, you know, something that's different from the toys that were being made before that were like really limited. They couldn't really do all that much, and people obviously weren't buying them. So they create these Gunpla kits. And the first of them releases in July of 1980. Do you want to guess how much the first Gunpla kit cost?
$500.
Not quite. You're a little cold.
I would imagine so.
Just a little cold.
I imagine so.
The first Gunpla, which was of the RX-78-2 model, cost about 300 yen.
Okay.
Which in US dollars is about $3.
Yeah. But how
which
big was it?
Feels insanely cheap.
Well, that's the question, right? Standard. How big was it though? You know?
It was honestly close to the size of the of something like your high grades, which we'll get into here. Yeah. But it was a model kit.
What do you think of inflation? I mean, this is the 80s.
Yeah. But even then, it's still,
It's almost like $10 now.
yeah. But the thing about those Gunpla as well is that they weren't nearly as articulate. The actual model itself, the detail in the models is obviously not nearly as precise. And another major thing with them is that you don't just snap them together. The thing with Gunpla model kits is that obviously they come in like a set of pieces that are part of these plastic molds called runners. You clip the pieces out of the molds, and then they're usually built in such a way that you can snap them and attach them together without needing any kind of an adhesive or fastener of any kind. They're built so that they can just kind of click and snap into place.
Now or then?
Now.
Okay.
The first Gunpla, you couldn't just snap them together. You had to glue them together with cement glue.
Okay. Very
so
common
if
in
you
40K
did it
still to this day. I mean,
yes.
the
So if
snapping
you did it
thing is
wrong,
like actually a new feature.
Mhm. Exactly. So if you glued them incorrectly or did it wrong, it was much more of a mess than what you can do with today's Gunpla. Also, they were all one color. You didn't have, runners that were different colors, different molds in different colors. It would just be like one color. It's usually like an off-white, kind of a bit of a greenish tinge to it.
Yeah.
So you would need to, generally, you would need to paint the individual pieces first and then assemble them.
Oh, so it's being real hobby territory.
Yes, absolutely. And so you would get this like really rigid model, not superposable. It's interesting. I watched a video on the very first like Gunpla models. They're more posable than you'd expect them to be. They have the arms and the shoulders can move. You have articulation at the knees. Like it is more posable than you'd expect, but it is obviously very limited compared to what we have.
I mean, it's probably not too far off from most 40K models.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially with the advent of so many of them being monoposed today.
Yeah. And these kits are referred to as FG or first grade. And here's an image of them so you can take a look. These have obviously been painted after the fact.
Yeah.
But you can see that like they're already kind of
Very
getting
stiff.
the hang of it. It very much looks like the RX-78. It has the articulation in the elbows and the shoulders and the knees. And it already has the weapon accessories. It has like the shield and the beam rifle and everything like that. And so these are released by Bandai. They are a success. They begin to sell like crazy. This, of course, I'm not sure the full chicken and the egg situation here, but Mobile Suit Gundam is interesting in that obviously it is a big part of like real robot as a genre existing. But one of the features of Super Robot, which is that whole like Monster of the Week format, that really exists in Mobile Suit Gundam as well, especially that first series. Because a lot of the structure they would follow is that Zeon, nearly every episode, like almost every other episode, they would have a new mobile suit that they would invent and design.
Right.
That they would then, use to try to attack the white base, and, Amuro Ray would have to fight. And obviously a big part of that was that they wanted to be able to sell toys of every mobile suit that they created. So you get all of these model kits that are coming out that are based on all these new designs, and nearly every episode they're creating new designs of mobile suits so that toys can be made from that.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, obviously, they were making a first version of toys first. So I think, and you're talking about the chicken and the egg thing. I think it's obviously pretty clear then that, like, at some point, no matter what, there was the concept that they would keep making new designs so that the other toys before Gunpla came around would still be able to have new ones, right? Like, they would make the new other toys, but then they obviously pivoted toy-wise to Gunpla.
Yes. And the success of these Gunpla, these model kits, is a big part of Gundam as a series being able to continue long after that first Mobile Suit Gundam has ended. They're able to continue releasing Gunpla kits. Let's talk about the different grades of Gunpla. So there was that first
The thing
grade
I
there.
know the least about, yes.
Yeah, and I love talking about this. 1979, they were releasing these first Gunpla. Within a year, in 1980, they already begin releasing other grades of Gunpla. Bandai starts working on creating other grade types. As soon as 1980, the high grade comes into existence. In our current day, there are like 5 major grades to consider. So that's going to be your high grade, your master grade, your real grade, perfect grade, and SD.
Wow.
So we'll start with high grades. This is probably the most commonly built kit is the high grade. There's a huge variety of high grade kits to choose from. If you see, they're going to have like the HG moniker, usually right on the box, on the front box art. That's how you'll know it's a high grade. They're going to have more articulation than something like your super deformed units, which we'll get to in a bit. They're posable, a lot of articulation in the joints. They come with a lot of accessories. They are 1 1/44 scale, which is a number you're going to see pop up a lot. 1 1/144 scale. Because it means that they're in kind of a smaller size that makes them really good for collecting and displaying on shelves. This is the kit that I almost universally recommend for people that are starting to build Gunpla for the first time.
I feel like that's common.
They are,
yes.
Yeah, they are detailed. They do have a lot of articulation. They have accessories, but they are not nearly as complex as some of the other grades that we'll be introduced to. And their size factor means that it is a lot easier to actually display them and find a place to store them.
Now, is that recommendation solely based on just getting into Gunpla first, or for hobbyists? Like is it specifically just for like you're new to Gunpla, go to this, or if you're just new to hobbying and plus Gundam, go to this? Like,
I would say
totally new
versus
like if you've done other hobbies, you could maybe go to this other one or whatever.
I would say the same thing applies even if you are a hobbyist of something else. I think the big thing is that with a high grade, it is a lot easier for you to practice if you're wanting to do any kind of like painting techniques, panel lining, weathering, things like that. Some of the easiest models to actually practice those techniques on are going to be something like a high grade. And the other aspect of the high grade is that among the different grades, it is one of the cheaper offerings as well, price wise. You don't have as much of a price wall. They're usually between like $12 to $25. So it's a little easier to sort of buy into them, to try them out as like your first Gunpla.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Next up, we'll talk about real grade. These are quite a bit newer. High grade was introduced as early as 1980. The real grade was introduced in 2010.
Oh, okay. Very new.
It was part of like the 30th anniversary celebration of Gundam.
But this is the next step, if you will.
Yes. Sort of. I am. It's interesting because all of these grades have like aspects that like commingle with each other. So I'm sort of introducing them in like a funky way. But the thing with real grades is that they are about the size of the high grades. They've got that like 1 1/144th scale size that the high grades have. But the real grade kits have a lot more detail. They have a lot more color separation, more articulation. They're going to come with a lot more decals and stickers that can be put on them. And the other thing about them is that they have a skeletal inner frame that the high grades do not have. So it's these models are really good for people that want the size of the high grade, but they also want to get a lot more out of the kit in general. They want to have something more detailed with a lot more features to it. That skeletal inner structure, that originates with the master grade. Master grades are a 1 in 100th scale kit, and those are usually priced between $30 to $50. They're much larger than high grades. They're a lot more detailed. They use this inner skeleton frame that you build the rest of the model around, which helps it to have even more articulation, and it's also a lot sturdier. Super posable, super detailed. And they are very popular as well. They don't have like the breadth of like number of models or like variety of models that the high grade has, but they're still very popular and a lot of people like to build them. Above the master grade is going to be the perfect grade. This is one of the biggest kits available on the market. They are a 1 in 60 scale.
Okay, so fairly bigger.
Fairly bigger. They are the most expensive kits by far. Most of your kits are going to be like above $120. We're getting into like Warhammer prices now.
Mm-hmm.
But usually with these, it is extremely detailed, fantastic model kits. The packaging that they come in is usually also like a lot more beautifully designed. Huge number of parts compared to even the master grade. They often have like individual finger articulation on them. It is the type of model that you are usually going to spend multiple weeks putting together. The other thing with perfect grades, they have that internal skeleton structure to them. And they also often have an integrated LED lighting system within the kit.
Oh.
Yeah. Which is super cool, but also very, very complex. And it's not so much so that like I would never recommend trying to build one. But just take your time when you do, because it is an extremely complicated model. It is the most expensive of all of them. It's going to look phenomenal, but just keep in mind that you need to make sure you have space for it. And when you're building it, take your time, because if you break something or make a mistake on it, it is not going to be a cheap fix. The last grade I'm going to mention is SD. SD stands for super deformed.
Oh.
You'll probably recognize these as it's the Gunpla models that have like the really big heads and like the body proportions will be really deformed and a lot smaller.
Yeah.
They use them a lot for, funnily enough, the video games. A lot of the video games will like specifically use super deformed. The video game series Super Robot Wars, nearly all of the mecha that appear in those games, they're using a super deformed version of that mecha. And then when they're doing their special attacks and their close-ups, they'll animate like the actual mecha itself.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, you're seeing them in that super deformed position. So
yeah, I mean that's a long look thing. I was gonna say a lot of cover arts and stuff. I remember seeing that stuff.
And they'll have a lot of like unique traits to them. Like they'll have like eyes, they have like eyes, more so of like a face. SD kits, very beginner friendly, and these are usually the ones that are recommended for like children.
Mm-hmm.
Is to build with SD Gundam. They're definitely meant to like appeal more so to children. But people of all ages do build them. I personally don't really build them much, but I can appreciate the appeal of them.
Right.
Phew. So those are your 5 real grade, or your 5 grade types rather.
Mm-hmm.
I am currently sitting on, I've got 9 boxes of high grade models here to build this year.
Yeah.
And then behind
me,
in a box that, I kid you not, is like bigger than my head,
Yeah.
I currently have a Master Grade Tall Geese 3 that was
Ooh.
just released at the start of the year that I pre-ordered. That I will also be hopefully building this year. And I'm very excited about it because it is the first Master Grade that I'll be building.
Ooh.
I'm very comfortable with high grades. I've done a lot of high grade builds. I've done a couple real grades as well.
Mm-hmm.
But this is my first Master Grade, so I am very excited to see how that turns out.
It's fun.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of Gunpla, if you're going to build Gunpla, then you got to have the tools to do it, right? You want to kind of have the tools of the trade. This is a candid image of my apartment. So nice. You can see this is kind of my setup. This is what I have set up as far as my little station. I am using, what you see there is a portable model kit table. It has there's a shelf built into it that catches, when you're in the process of like clipping out parts of your model from the runners, you'll often end up with very small plastic bits that fall from it. So instead of having those like fall onto the floor, they can fall through the holes in the grate and into the shelf, and then you can use that to just kind of remove, clean those out, get rid of them later on. I want to be clear, you do not need this.
Oh, of course not.
The reason I have this little table, I actually got it for myself as like a Christmas gift, is because this is a hobby that I am actively participating in. It's something that I do a lot. I've been doing it for years. So I know that I'm bought in and I can benefit greatly from having a little workstation like this that I can set up.
Right. I mean, we talk about this similarly with when we did the Warhammer hobbying stuff. It's just, this is about when you're really into it.
No, yeah. This is very much for people who are into it and know that they want to have a little portable workstation like this.
And we probably similarly, like, when we were a Warhammer podcast, we could have talked more about and had an episode about when the things that you can upgrade to and stuff like that.
Definitely. Yeah. No, if we hadn't gotten so bored with Warhammer in the first place, I think we would have had a lot more to kind of dig into in that regard.
It's been a while since we revisited the Rage Bait, so it was a good time to bring it back.
But the thing I want to emphasize with this is that I'm not showing this to be like, ooh, look at this thing you have to have. These regularly sell for like $70 to $100.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna be real with you. That's just too much. It is simply too much.
Welcome to Hobby Supplies.
I'm glad I bought it. But I also bought it understanding that this is far too expensive. I am buying this purely as this is for me. This is because I wanted it.
Oh, we should. If you think that, we should take a look at Games Workshop Hobby Supplies. You'll be ecstatic.
But it is far too expensive for anyone who is looking to build Gunpla for the first time to even consider. You don't need it. What you should have at most is maybe a self-healing cutting mat, you can kind of see is integrated into the workstation there. You can literally go to a Joann's or a Michael's or whatever, get a cutting mat that gets used for sewing. Just something like that is a clean, flat surface that you will be able to work with your Gunpla models on. You'll also generally want to have a few other items. A lot of these aren't required per se. They're just nice.
Mm-hmm.
You have, you have an X-Acto knife there. There is tweezers. The big thing with the tweezers is for applying stickers and decals, which can be very annoying.
Absolutely.
Particularly with Gunpla models, a lot of them have incredibly small decals. Even the high grades that obviously are more of I usually recommend them for beginners. They will have very small stickers that you got to kind of be careful with. So that's where the tweezers are really handy because it's a way to be able to very gently pick those up and apply them without damaging the model or the sticker too much.
Mm-hmm.
You can probably see there that there is some files, these metal files. I've got one as well. You can see on the right-hand side there. having a file is great because when you're clipping the pieces of the Gunpla kit out of the runners, a lot of times what'll happen is that you'll have like the tiniest little nub still on the edge of the piece. And so using a nail file like that is a good way to kind of like soften that edge out. You just want to be careful. Less is more. Don't file it too much because then you can often end up like digging into the actual part itself and you can end up potentially damaging.
Which is actually why I would actually recommend the main way that I've seen the recommendations in doing that, because obviously this is a thing in 40K models, is to get rid of the main part of that with the X-Acto knife and then use like a foam, like a nail file, like a one that is like the foam kind of like not a metal one, because that gives you a lot more leniency to get it flat and invisible, but without, as long as obviously you cut with the X-Acto knife correctly, which is applying almost no pressure whatsoever and just letting it glide through plastic. And then it will allow you to be able to just go down without necessarily digging too much, because metal files, they have their use. I use them plenty too, but is a lot easier to accidentally dig too far.
Yeah, I get you. The other thing I want to point out is I believe we actually did talk about this in a previous episode when we were talking about tools to use with model kits. But having something like the paint holder that you can see there is really nice just for having little spaces where you can put parts as you work on them. It's a good way to just kind of like, if you've got really small parts that you're working on, you can just sort of set them aside, categorize them, space them out, so you don't have to worry about losing them later on. That's something that I bought from, I think it was from Michael's for literally like a couple dollars. Very, very great thing. And it's the type of thing that honestly doesn't come in a lot of like, there's a lot of like all-in-one model building kits out there where it's like all the tools that you would supposedly need. And a lot of them don't include something like that. They don't really include something to like hold pieces in.
Yeah, that's a common thing. It's kind of, I mean, it's kind of funky when you think about it.
So definitely something to consider with those. We have here a Gundam marker. So there is an assortment of Gundam markers available and model markers. They usually serve two purposes. They're either going to be for coloring in parts of the Gunpla model in general, or the one that I've got sitting on my station there on the left, that is a panel liner. So with model kits like these, you can go in and you can use the panel liner marker to really bring out the lines within the model itself, and they help to really accentuate the figure of the actual model, and it makes the details really pop. The same way that like eyeliner helps to really make your eyes pop when you're applying makeup. It serves that same function. It's meant to very much accentuate the model. It's not a requirement by any means, but it's a really great way to just kind of like make those features stand out more. And the last thing here that you'll notice is that there are these cutters, these nippers. The ones that are being shown here are very rudimentary. But a big thing is that you got to have a tool to actually cut the pieces out of the runners to begin with. And so that's where these come in.
And not scissors.
Do not use scissors. I truly cannot stress that enough. Do not use scissors. So the question becomes, which of these should I buy? Like, what is there like a particular brand I should buy? Which of these should I use?
That's a rabbit hole.
And that's a bit of a rabbit hole. We're not going to go crazy with it. But let's talk about believing in God.
Hand.
Yeah. The important thing about believing in God is that a lot of people in the community that you're going to talk to are going to probably recommend the God Hand Ultimate Nipper, seen right here.
As in every hobby you do, no matter what it is in existence,
nearly every.
They will all.
This is an extremely popular tool. It gets recommended very often. Usually goes for $50 to $60. very highly recommended. Something that you're going to notice with all of these that I'm going to show is that they are a single-edged cutter.
Mhm.
What that means is that one edge is sharp, it's very sharp, but then the other edge is like dull or flattened.
Mhm.
And the reason for that is because if both edges were sharpened, it would create this kind of pinching motion on the actual plastic itself. And a lot of times that doesn't result in a very clean cut. It results in like these rough little nubs that you then have to file off later. By having the one side be sharp, one side be flat, it gives a flat surface for you to rest that part of the runner on. And then your sharp edge comes down on top of it and gives you a very clean cut. So most of the cutters that people are going to recommend, regardless of the brand, they're usually going to recommend something that is like a single edge that has one sharp edge and one flat edge, because that is going to cut through runners much easier.
And you're also going to go a lot. I was going to say, you'll see that in hobby shops and stuff. It's just like either as model nip or like plastic cutter, you know?
Yes. Because they're more so designed to cut plastic specifically. And a lot of these, when you're looking at the details on them, they will specify, they're like, this is meant to be used for specific thicknesses of plastic. It is not meant to be used as like an all-purpose cutter. You know, you don't want to go do your wiring work with these. Like, that's not what they're for. All you're really going to do is you're going to damage the blade at that point. Another one that I see get recommended a lot is the Tamiya TAM 74035 side cutter. This it's been around for quite a while. This is very much the like old reliable. Usually goes for about like $25 to $30 nowadays. I really like these. I'm not using them right now, but I really like these because of the handles. I find the handles on them tend to be pretty sturdy. I would love the spring to be a little bit tighter, but you know, it is what it is. And in some cases you can kind of adjust that. What I'm actually using right now, just to kind of see if it's actually worth recommending in the future, is that I'm currently using the Rua tool, specifically the Rua tool 1.0. This is also a single edged with the non-slip grip. Something that you see with these cutters is that they tend to have a screw and a nut on the left side there. The reason that's important is because that is acting as a guard. That can be adjusted, and it's what's preventing you from completely squeezing the cutters all the way and potentially damaging and wearing down the blades over time. So that is in there as a sort of stop. And the spring is obviously there for the articulation of the tool itself. But having that nut in there that you can adjust is a really big deal. Highly recommend that you get a tool that has it. If we look back at these ones, you can see that these don't even have them at all, and they have a very simple spring to them, which means that they're frankly just going to wear out faster. But yeah,
granted, that can be dependent, because I mean, I will note I do need a new one, but I had my Citadel one that I got in my painter, like your first paint kit that GW sells, because they'll usually come with a nipper, a brush, and the like 10 pots. It doesn't, it's very rudimentary. It doesn't have the gap. It's not great for many things. Like, it's not to justify it, but it is like the realm of like, as long as you don't mash it.
Yes. Be very mindful in your cuts.
Yeah, which you shouldn't do anyway.
No, absolutely.
They can still work.
I think the thing to say here is that I recommend using tools like the ones that I'm showing here instead of like those more basic clippers, not just because of the clippers themselves, but also because of the model. The clippers are something that you will eventually replace. Even God hands break. Mm-hmm. There are multiple instances of God hands breaking, even though they're heralded as like, you know, the greatest thing since sliced bread. Your tool will break eventually. but you don't want that to affect the model that you're ideally going to keep for a long time. So when keeping that in mind, it's like you're not just buying a better tool to have a better tool. You're buying a better tool so that your model comes out better as a result.
I think that is a sage wisdom for like every tool based purchase you make.
Absolutely. Yep, applies to everything. So this is the cheapest of the bunch, the Rua tool. Right now you can get it for like $17 to $20. Like I mentioned, I purchased a pair myself. I've been working with them currently. I'm going to try them out this year and see if they're any good. If they're still holding on by the end of the year, then it will definitely become something that I recommend to people more often. But as it is, you know, usually the God Hand or the Tamiya are really strong recommendations. Honestly, I might even say the Tamiya. I might say the God Hand's just a bit overrated. But with the God Hand, you are still you're still buying a quality clipper. You know, it's not like it's trash.
No, but it's a good reference quality point because there's a lot of God Hand, I don't want to say copies, but like God Hand defeaters out there, like ones that are better value and actually do work just as well, if not better. Yes. But it's like the reference point.
Yeah, definitely.
It's like, this is what you should go for, and then find ways to that. Like, this is your baseline. If you can't be a God Hand in general, then you shouldn't have bothered. That's kind of how I look at the God Hand, where it's like, this is your baseline.
Yeah.
You can try to beat it, and you can either be the same thing, but just a cheaper price, or be a similar price, but you do X and Y better. That's your guideline, right? It's just like, what are you doing that, but as long as that's your baseline, then you're good.
Definitely. All right. Are you ready for the final arc in our covering of Gundam today?
In our 2-hour-long excursion, yes.
We talked about the anime series, the original anime series. We talked about Gunpla. Let's talk about Gundam as a video game franchise.
Woo! Yeah, shout out to all my Dynasty Warrior Gundam fans out there. Yeah.
You have expressed interest in the past about, hey, how do I, when it comes to Gundam as a video game franchise, is there a particular game that is a good start? Is there a series that is a good start, a good way to get into the franchise? So here's the thing.
Real question, by the way. I did ask this.
Yes, this is real. The thing about Gundam.
This is partly why this episode exists, actually.
Correct. Yes. The thing about Gundam is that there are over 250 games in the Mobile Suit Gundam franchise.
Yeah, you know.
There are over 250. What I'm showing you here on the screen right now, this is not the entirety of it.
I imagine not.
It is missing several titles. The latest title that I'm showing down at the bottom here, Gundam Evolution, is from 2021, 4 years ago. And there have been multiple Gundam games that have come out since then.
Yes.
Gundam as a video game franchise is enormous and varied, and the quality of it wildly fluctuates.
Much like Warhammer.
Much like Warhammer in that regard, where it can become a thing of like, how do I know which one to even play? What is the good one? What is the bad ones? How does this work? So here's my thing.
Yes.
There are certain games that stand out to me as like, these are particularly interesting games, or very compelling, or fun to play, or interesting to play. In terms of like recommending your first Gundam game, that has always been a difficult question, because you are approaching a series with several different timelines, hundreds and hundreds of characters, thousands of different mobile units that have been designed over the years. And so it is really difficult to pick just one as this sort of comprehensive introduction to the franchise as a whole. Mobile Suit Gundam as video games, unlimited video games, has a long storied history, nearly as long as the series itself. You know, I could recommend to you Kido Senshai Gundam Part 1, Gundam Daishi and Tatsu. I could. The problem is I don't know that I have an immediate way for you to play it. Seeing as it was on the PCX and released in like 1986, I believe it was. I could also recommend to you something like, say, SD Gundam World Gachapon Senshi Scramble Wars, which was released in 1988.
Yeah.
This was released for the Famicom Disk System. Not the Famicom system, the Famicom Disk System. This game, I'm bringing it up because it is very, very old. It is not easy to get into, but it is very interesting because it is a tactics game. And I know you as someone who is a fan of Fire Emblem. It is also, curiously enough, not fully a turn-based tactical game. You are moving your units and positioning them on a tactical map, but when you engage an attack, you are dropped into an environment like the one you see here, and you have full control of your Gundam, and you are actively fighting the enemy unit with a time limit. The result is really interesting. I think it's like, I don't know that I would say it is faster than playing through a more traditional tactical turn-based game, but it gives it a very nice dichotomy, and it is astounding after all this time that the controls are like somewhat functional, as opposed to being just like completely obtuse and like impossible to follow. This is like probably the earliest game in the Mobile Suit Gundam franchise that I would recommend if you can get your hands on it. And I don't expect you to get a physical copy of this anywhere anytime soon.
No.
You're probably not going to just like slap this into the Famicom Disk System that you own and go to town.
Yeah, that Famicom I have.
There are other ways to play it, but I'm just saying you're probably not going to play it on the original system if you do. No. I want to bring up a couple more Gundam games. Again, the games I'm bringing up here, these are not like, these are the ones that I'm going to guarantee to somebody who's never played a Gundam game before. To me, these are like the highlights. These are my personal standouts.
Okay.
With that in mind, the Gundam game that most makes you feel like you are piloting a Gundam. There's no competitor. Nothing comes close compared to Mobile Suit Gundam Bonds of the Battlefield, as well as its sequel, Bonds of the Battlefield 2. This is the game that you have probably seen at many an arcade, where it is actually built into this large arcade pod machine. They're actually called a POD. You are completely like, you sit in a seat inside of it, inside of a cockpit, and then the doors are actually closed in behind you. And so it is like this enormous screen that almost wraps around to the side so that you're having to like actively move your head, like turn your head in real time to like see everything. And you have like your joystick set up, like a full throttle system. It is the closest it comes to feel like you're actually piloting a Gundam. It is incredibly fun. It has never not been fun to me. Obviously very arcadey in how it works and how it plays. A lot of these you can choose to play as either the Earth Federation forces, or you can play as Zeon. And it's just really fun. It is just really fun. Launch into a mission, shoot a bunch of the enemies, keep an eye on your ammo, and really, really enjoyable experience, even if you have no idea what's going on in the Gundam series as a whole. It's just very easy to get into as like, I am piloting a giant robot, I shoot the other giant robots, and I have fun.
Yeah, I mean,
that's just how it works.
There is nothing that hits the Gundam meme more than when you do play the video games, because video games generally do kind of surmount to just be like, oh look, I'm the cool robot.
Yeah, absolutely. The next game I want to bring up is a little bit of a different genre, but I think what makes this stand out so much is not only is it one of the highest acclaimed Gundam games among Gundam fans, but it's also manages to be one of the best games in its genre. And that's fighting games. As we talk about Mobile Suit Gundam Battle Assault 2.
Oh, baby.
This game rules. It is phenomenal. It is built on the bones of Street Fighter 2 and the Capcom CP2 engine. It functions a lot like, Street Fighter games do. The special attacks are often done the same way. You have charge attacks. You have your quarter circle forward motions, your dragon punch motions. Every character has various special moves that they can do. They're all scaled accurately in relation to each other. So some characters are a lot smaller than others, but they're also more agile. They can dash through the air. They can more easily avoid attacks. Some of them have short range attacks. Others have long range. Some can do throws. I'm not going to call this game balanced.
What? What?
It's really not.
What? Do you not think everybody's favorite character, Big Zam?
Big Zam, the star of the show here, is... they take up half the screen space,
Yeah, what's wrong with Big Zam?
And what's wrong with that? Exactly. It's still really fun. The game itself is both accurate in its portrayal of these Gundam units, but it also manages to be a really fun fighting game. And there is genuine strategy to it. And it's super enjoyable. And the reason that people still play it to this day is because of how enjoyable of an experience it is. There is a Power Rangers fighting game that is also very similar. It's kind of built on that CP2 engine. It's borrowing a lot from the bones of Street Fighter. And it proves that they were just sort of this winning formula here. And then you just got to put a little bit of polish on top of it. Have the characters everybody wants to play as. That's the Sazabi, by the way, on the left there.
Yeah.
That Char is piloting. And you've got yourself a winning formula. And so it's one of those things that's even if you don't like fighting games, if you're interested in Gundam, this is a really fun thing to just kind of play and just mash the buttons and do the specials, see the cool beam moves, see the cool throws, and you're gonna have a fun time with it.
Mm-hmm.
So we get to our final game.
Is it something I could actually download on Steam?
every game that we've talked about so far has been one that you can't just play immediately right here, right now.
Yes.
For the record,
there's a way. There's a way
SD
to
Gundam
do
World, Gachapon Sensei, Scramble Wars. There are ways to play it.
Yes.
Bonds of the Battlefield, obviously, if there's an arcade that you can go to that happens to have it, that is a way to access it.
Yeah.
Gundam Battle Assault 2, I'll tell you, is available on archive.org.
Oh, okay.
They do have it there.
That's actually cool.
Because obviously they have their integrated MAME system for emulation for a lot of games that have been archived. The controls are all crazy. So it's a real learning process, but that's just kind of how they have their emulator set up, is that it's using keyboard controls and it's really funky, but it's technically there, it's technically playable, and I also own it. Wink wink, nudge nudge.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's also using a real legitimate console. This released for the PlayStation. Great game on the PlayStation. But I frankly spent way more time than necessary hitting my head against the wall, because there are several Gundam games, a lot of them more modern ones, that are available on Steam, but a lot of them are very mixed in terms of what kind of experience they give you. And so I was fighting with the idea of, what can I actually genuinely recommend to Marshall? As if you want to play a Gundam video game, play this one. And I thought about it.
I went back through, replayed some of them. I read reviews. I talked with people. And the conclusion I came to is that right now, for you, I would personally recommend that you try out Gundam Breaker 4.
All right.
This is a game that just recently released within the past couple of years here. The Gundam Breaker series, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a series that's been around for a good bit, but it's also relatively new in relation to other Gundam series. And it is much more focused on the model building aspect instead of trying to like be a replication of the other stories from the different timelines and like the Universal Century timeline and all that. It's its own story where people collect and build Gundams, and then they use the power and magic of VR to fight them against each other. And there's a lot of kit bashing, which is of course the art of like taking parts from multiple model kits and putting them together to create something new. And a lot of just like rebuilding Gundam, giving them upgrades, customizing them, creating your own, and then fighting them together. I adore Gundam Breaker 3, which wasn't released in the US. You had to import it from Hong Kong.
Oh, good.
But it was worth it because it was a fantastic game. And Gundam Breaker 4 was actually properly released to the US with a Steam release. When it first came out, there was a lot of mixed reviews on it. People were very much not happy with like how like the DLC stuff was being handled with it.
Yeah, it's common.
I
feel
it wasn't as fully fledged as Gundam Breaker 3 obviously was, because at that point Gundam Breaker 3 had been out for multiple years. And so there was just kind of this feeling of like, it's not right out the gate. It's not as good as Breaker 3 was, you know, it's not really exceeding it in any way. But that feeling has kind of simmered over time. It's been improved. The game itself runs a little better. They've made changes to it. And it's at the point now where like I would absolutely recommend it. It's very fun. And you don't need to know like a ton of the lore of like the Gundam series to, you know, go in and play. You can just sort of follow along with the main campaign story for it, and the process of collecting Gundam pieces, putting together your own Gundam model kits, getting to do the customization on them, and then you get to go into these, you know, enclosed battlefields where you can fight other Gundam models. The combat itself, it's not like character action level, but it's good, you know, like hack and slash combat with ranged weapons as well. And it ends up being just like a really fun game that also does have models from like all across different Gundam series, and has super deformed models. It has high grade, master grade models, all that. So it manages to be like this all encapsulating thing. And again, it is fully playable, which is like an important part of
a video game.
Of being able to recommend it, is that this is a game that you can buy it on Steam. You can play it for yourself and enjoy it. It's a game that you can get right now, and you don't need to have played the previous games in the series to get into it. I feel like in that regard, it is very easy to access it.
Yeah, it's really accessible.
So what I did is that I went ahead and I bought Marshall a copy of the game.
I see that. Well, thank you.
I feel, and it's one of those things, you know, not everybody I feel like is going to come away from playing this game and being like, now I really want to get into Gundam as a hobby.
Yeah.
But it is, I feel, the most accessible right now. It is the easiest to get into. It has a lot of just like the core of what is fun about building model kits in the first place.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not going to get you like super invested into the story of Gundam itself, but you have the anime series for that. You have the manga for that. You do have other outlets for getting into those other stories. And this is, funnily enough, manages to kind of merge two of the hobbies together, the video games and the model kits, into one thing. So you kind of get to have that exhilaration and thrill of building a model kit before you even build a physical model kit. and you can decide like, hey, this is actually really fun. I'm gonna go buy my own model kit now and try it out for real.
For real.
So this is the one that I would recommend. This is the game right now that I would say like this is the one to get. I would probably not recommend.
Yeah, I was gonna say something that isn't very plot heavy. It is usually a great starting point. I mean, it's why Space Marine 2, for example, was such a good game for people who are unfamiliar with Warhammer to get into it with.
Yeah,
because it's not as deep as Warhammer stories can go. But you get to be the spaceman, so being able to be the Gundam, I feel like is very helpful and important.
It puts you in the shoes of sort of the primary interest of that series, which is taking control of that character and being able to swing a laser sword around.
Exactly.
And with that, that is the end of everything that I've got for you today. Obviously, a very general overview of the anime. There's still so many other anime to cover. We scratched the surface of the original Mobile Suit Gundam. There's so much more that can be talked about in terms of the Gunpla, in terms of the video games. Again, over 250 of them exist, and I've played a bunch. I'll say like 50 to 70 to be safe. There's so much more to talk about, but that is just kind of like a general overview of like what's going on in these different aspects of the franchise. That is like a franchise that is near and dear to my heart, one of my favorites that I adore and love seeing other people get into and get excited about as well.
Yeah, like I've discovered this Nobel Gundam.
Oh yeah. Noble Gundam, baby.
Yeah, which I am
super cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say which I am infatuated with looking at because it is just they were just like Sailor Moon is popular, right? Except it wouldn't even been out then. Because this is from the original series, right?
The thing about the Noble Gundam is that it was originally developed by Neo Sweden. There's not enough time for us to talk about Neo Sweden.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, it is. There are like specific anime series that it actually appears in. Specifically, Mobile Fighter G Gundam is, I think, where it first.
Oh, G, that's what that is. That's a G Gundam. It's not. That's not that's not the just Japanese logo of the original one. Got it.
Correct. That
would explain the large G.
Yeah, and we could do a whole different thing on Sailor Moon because I'm also a huge Sailor Moon fan. But we don't have to.
That's putting off too far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because for me, it's like obviously just like, oh, this Gundam looks cool. I know, it's like always the baseline. And then obviously like the thought is, that's the hope, right? That it's like you get attached to one for whatever reason. And then that's where you dive in and be like, I want to know more about that Gundam. So you like start looking up maybe the wiki and then you learn like, okay, well, it's this character's Gundam and from this series. And even though you may know what happens to portions of them if you read like a wiki or whatever, but like then that could still drive you to be like, well, I'm going to watch that series now. I want to see what that means or how that unfolds or I'm pinged by the beginning of it without spoilers. I'm going to, before I get spoiled, I'm going to watch it, or I'm going to read it or whatever. Right. So like, that's kind of the thing that I think that always helps. It's like discover something and like either just even design or whatever wise. I mean, we talked about this with the factions, right? Where it was just like find a faction that you attach to the most, even if it's just aesthetically, right? Then look into it and then be like, is is there a lore tidbit that I like about it? Or is there something about maybe its background that maybe is like a deal breaker, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, okay, maybe not that one, but maybe I like it, but it won't be like, let me look around it. Like, what's something similar?
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, no, awesome.
Are there any other questions you have about Gundam?
Why did that dude punch that girl?
I made it clear. I guess we'll just go back. I made it so clear to you. I said we can't talk about the Bright Slap. We don't have enough time
That's
today
the Bright Slap?
to talk about the Bright Slap, as well as every other slap that occurs in the history of the Mobile Suit Gundam series.
But that was the one thing I said we needed to talk about in this episode when we were
I
talking
know,
about
but we
it.
don't have time. This already took like almost 3 hours.
Damn it.
I'm sorry. But take comfort in the fact that, yes, this is a named phenomenon.
What,
that has its own TV tropes page.
What, of a character punching a woman?
Not specifically punching a woman, but people getting slapped in general. The thing to acknowledge is that, yes, unfortunately, especially in the earlier Gundam series, they like to physically assault women, which is bad, and is a part of those series that we have thankfully like largely grown past.
Yes.
But there is a weird aspect to it where a lot of people, especially like main characters, get slapped around in general. There is a lot of people just like slapping around the main characters, and the idea is that like it is the quote unquote, it's the slap that like gets them, that like brings them to their senses. You know, it's that very tropey thing of like slapping someone to be like, snap out of it, you know, get a hold of yourself. But they do it over and over and over again to both men and women throughout the series, to the point where it's comical. It's ridiculous.
Yes. Is that the slap that I'm referring to, and I'll definitely have a gif up of the screen at some point. Which series is that from?
The one you're referring to.
Yes, the one I'm referring to.
And this is very indicative of the issue with Gundam. I think you're referring to the ones from Zeta Gundam.
Yeah, he gives her the invite, or she gives him the invite. Everybody claps, and then he rips it up.
Oh, no, that's not what I'm thinking of at all.
All right, what I'm thinking of, that's not the one he hits her, or she gets hit, right? Hold on.
Yeah, that is oh gosh, what did that end up being?
Oh, that was Gundam Wing.
That was Wing. Yep. I was gonna say, yeah, that was not any of like the original.
Oh, that's not what it is though. It's right. That's not the scene where like she gets hit or something. He like, when he passes by after he rips it up, like he like brushes her like tear away, and then he's like I'll kill you or something.
Yeah, it's absurd.
Right, that's what that was.
But yeah, that is not the same thing as what's going on in like the original Gundam series.
Yes,
but there is a lot of slapping.
I definitely conflated two things together.
Yeah.
Because again, as we've already alluded to, there's clearly many memes that have formed and wild things that have happened.
Yes.
For example, why would you wear bikinis in space? But that'll do it for this episode.
Well, that was just the 70s. That's just the 70s.
Yeah.
Right,
but yes. Dylan's counterattack.
This has been another episode of Mobile Suit Gundam, Dylan's counterattack. Stay tuned next week. The week after this April Fool's, where we return to our regularly scheduled programming of more Gundam, and continue to talk about Gundam for years to come, because there's frankly a lot more to talk about than there ever was with Warhammer.
You are exactly correct. Next week.
Also, there's no orcs, which is like a huge bonus. Huge
bonus. I think that's probably
Yeah.
the one thing that that's detracting from this. Why can't
No.
there needs to be
Orcs
more
are dumb.
crumping.
Anyone who likes orcs is subhuman. They're yeah. Why like orcs when robots are right there? That's all I'm saying.
All right. Well, for sure, I can guarantee next week's episode will be Gundam.
Definitely will be Gundam.
Read between the lines on that one.
I'm looking at this art. I'm looking at this calendar that says April 1st on it, and I'm saying there will definitely be Gundam.
Oh, there will
next
be.
time.
There will be. That's no joke. There will be Gundam next week.
Yeah.
Just read between the lines.
Mm-hmm.
All right. See you later.
Goodbye, everyone.